Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video that I found very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, personally, overall, by a boxing channel by the name of DontesBoxingNation. And what this is mainly going to be about is overall Mr. Teofimo Lopez and his new debut, I believe, all in all, at the 140-pound division. And of course, for those of you that do not know, what recently happened, I believe, with Mr. Teofimo Lopez's career. His most recent comeback fight was at the 140-pound division after losing overall his last fight, one of the bigger fights in his career, against Mr. George Kambosos at the 135-pound division, where he ended up losing that fight, I believe, by split decision. In my opinion, George Kambosos did deserve to win that fight. And of course, there was a big question, in my opinion, where was Teofimo Lopez going to go from here? Because certain boxers, especially after they lose after they lose that first fight in their career, they're sometimes never the same again mentally. Ricky Hatton was never the same after he ended up losing his first fight. Miguel Cotto was never the same after he ended up losing his first fight. Deontay Wilder, you can tell, was never the same after that ass whooping that he took against Tyson Fury. And Sergey Kovalev was never mentally the same after he lost to Andre Ward. So certain fighters, once they lose a fight, they are never the same. But Teofimo Lopez, what I will say about this, even though Pedro Campa, of course, he is not a fighter that, in my view, was an A-grade fighter, maybe not even a B-grade fighter, I thought that Teofimo Lopez's performance, especially for the mental state that he seemed to be in, I thought that it was at least a decently impressive performance for his standards, especially for how he looked in that last fight. But anyways, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, he is going to talk about it, and he is also going to talk about the possibility of there being fights between Mr. Teofimo Lopez, not only with some of the other top 140-pounders in the world, but also debatably maybe between himself and Devin Haney a little bit later on, or Gervonta Tank Davis, or also Mr. Ryan Garcia. And I'm going to commentate on however I believe those fights would go out or play out. Let's get into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Well, the report has come out on Teofimo Lopez's performance over Pedro Campa, and man, it's bad. And the way you can tell that it's bad is when...
Man, it's bad. You know, Dante overall just annoys me a lot of the times because a lot of the times you can tell that overall he is so biased within his commentary that it really is just to a point of ridiculousness. I mean, when Gervonta Tank Davis, or let's just be real, another Black American fighter, when it's a Black American fighter or a fighter that he tends to like, when it comes down to it, even if they do not have the most impressive performances, he always blows it up to be some all-time great performance, like when Gervonta Tank Davis fought Isaac Pitbull Cruz, or when he fought that of a Rolly Romero. But Teofimo Lopez in his last fight against Pedro Campa, when it comes down to it, which in my opinion, I wouldn't say that it was one of the greatest performances that I've ever seen. But when you take into the tally that Teofimo Lopez in his last fight probably was somewhat a mentally broken fighter, almost to the point to where he seemed downright suicidal. The fact that he was able to come back in a new weight class against a fighter that was gaining confidence overall heading into this fight, because all in all, he was a fighter that I believe had only lost one fight in his career. He was known for having a little bit of pop in his punches, and this was Teofimo's first fight at 140. So I do give him a certain amount of credit, especially considering the circumstances. You know, but Dante, you can tell that he wants Teofimo Lopez and Ryan Garcia. He wants their careers to go down the shitter and wants their careers to go down the drain so bad, just because overall he doesn't want any of these fighters to possibly return to that top 10 pound-for-pound list. And that's why so much of his commentary is just so damn obnoxious. You know, there's really no problem with having a preference overall for your people, but there's a difference between having a preference for your people and overall, you know, maybe overall basically saying that, you know, you root for these people just because they're your own ethnicity, and overall purposely overall giving out biased commentary overall and living through certain things, living through certain sporting events overall, and giving the most biased overall non-objective commentary that you possibly can. You can tell all in all whenever he talks about a Teofimo Lopez or a Canelo Alvarez or a Tyson Fury or a Ryan Garcia, you can tell all in all the vitriol that he has for these fighters. But every time he talks about Gervonta Tank Davis or Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade or Deontay Wilder, even if certain circumstances happen the same, he always treats him with kid gloves. It's just obnoxious. But anyway.
Almost all of Teofimo Lopez's own peers are criticizing his performance after he moved up to 140 for the first time. And keep in mind, Teofimo said that he would actually be even better at 140 because he had been at 135 for too long. Now, and I'm just going to give you guys a...
Right, but he's supposed to say that. Teofimo Lopez, of course, was a fighter that lost his last fight. Teofimo Lopez is going to say that. That's what a lot of boxers say, especially when they end up losing in a weight class and then they end up moving up in a weight class. That's just what they tend to say. So I'm not surprised by what Teofimo Lopez said. He's using overall that, 135 was draining me, which it probably was to a degree, but that's not the main reason why he lost to George Kambosos. It just is what it is.
Couple of different boxers' reaction to his performance. I'm going to put it up on the screen. You guys can go ahead and read the tweets. These are tweets from Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, and Regis Prograis, a fighter that Teofimo actually called out after he beat Campa.
Right, but once again, we must consider this. Every single one of those fighters that you just mentioned, Dante, are his contemporaries. Every single one of those fighters that you just mentioned, all in all, are fighters that are potentially going to be facing him within his next few fights. So why would they really be complimenting him? I mean, don't get me wrong. Just because you're in the same weight class as a fighter does not mean that you would not be complimenting them. I'm not saying that it never happens. But did Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder really, compliment each other when they were about to fight each other? No, they didn't. It just is what it is. That's just usually how it happens. All right, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, when they were about to fight, they usually did not compliment each other's, fighting style. It just is what it is. There's a competition there.
Many other boxers were impressed with Teofimo Lopez's performance. Now, while a lot of boxers felt like he looked extremely flawed moving up to 140, fighting against a very relatively unknown cherry-picked opponent, one of the boxers that criticized Teofimo Lopez stood out the most, and that is Fernando Vargas Jr.
Dante overall is saying that Teofimo Lopez's opponent was cherry-picked. Well, I don't understand. Did you expect Teofimo Lopez to immediately get in the ring with a Josh Taylor or a Regis Prograis or a Jose Ramirez? Like, Dante, once again, just with his commentary, you could tell that he hates Teofimo Lopez and a lot of these other fighters so bad. It's the same thing with Canelo Alvarez, because when Canelo Alvarez lost to Dimitri Bivol, what did Dante's Boxing Nation say? Oh, well, let's face Dimitri Bivol again. The reason why he said that is because he wants Canelo Alvarez as a non-threat, basically, to any pound-for-pound list. So he wants Teofimo Lopez's career to be over. That's like if Deontay Wilder, after he got his ass kicked against Tyson Fury, that's like me saying, you know what, Deontay, we don't need to see you in the ring with a tune-up fight. I know you just got your ass kicked and you're trying to rebuild your career, but let's get in the ring with Andrew Ruiz. Let's drop that bomb, on you immediately. It's just not going to work that way. Teofimo Lopez was a person, overall a fighter that was a little bit mentally broken after that George Kambosos fight. You have to build him back up incrementally. You can't just put him in there with some of the top contenders immediately, especially in a weight class to where a lot of these guys are probably going to be able to compete with his power and his size.
The Vargas brothers, they're good friends with Teofimo. I'm not saying they're best friends, but Teo, he put up videos of him hanging out with the Vargas brothers. He shouted them out before. And yet Vargas Jr., he went into complete detail, explaining why he wasn't impressed with Lopez's performance.
Did you guys like how Teofimo looked tonight, Fernando? I'm going to be real, man. He looked a little tired. I don't know what it is. Maybe, the ring rust, maybe psychologically just having having that hard fight and then coming back, maybe it's a little bit too much pressure, but got the job done, knocked him out. But, I know Oscar's here and, other people are scouting him. And 140, I don't know. I didn't really see that devastating Teofimo power at 140, so but we'll have to see a little more fights. Yeah, the guy was...
Well, with Vargas Jr., I believe what he said is that he believes that Teofimo Lopez looked a little bit tired. I don't really remember any moments in the fight to where Teofimo Lopez was tired. Maybe he was here and there because, of course, once again, give the kid a little bit of a break. This is his first fight at 140 pounds. This was a fighter that, no, he was not an A-grade fighter, but he was gaining a certain amount of confidence. Now, a certain amount of people overall may say, well, you maybe would not judge Gervonta Tank Davis the same way. Well, the reason why that is because Gervonta Tank Davis is an undefeated fighter. When you're talking about a fighter, overall like a Teofimo Lopez who just lost his last fight, you have to judge him on a different level, or you have to judge him on a different scale, especially mentally coming into this fight, because his mentality is going to be different. Teofimo Lopez just ended up losing the first fight in his career, and that's a traumatic experience for a lot of these boxers. Just like Deontay Wilder, now after he got his ass whooped against Tyson Fury, if he tries to go in the ring against some of those other top contenders, it's going to be a little bit traumatic for him. Because if he gets hit with certain shots and overall if certain things end up happening, it might trigger certain PTSD moments. So it's going to be very interesting to see where Teofimo Lopez's career goes from here. In my opinion, if you're going to ask me what would I rank the performance, I would say I would give it an A minus to A. I don't know about A plus, but I thought that it was a very decent performance, especially overall considering the certain factors, especially Teofimo Lopez overall, the way that he was, the way that he lost his last fight, and some of the things that he seemed like he was going through mentally because of that loss when it came down to it. I would give the performance an A to A minus. Now, of course, some of them also mentioned, well, it didn't seem like the Teofimo Lopez power was there. Well, Teofimo Lopez really is naturally a 140-pounder. The power still seemed to be decent, but he's not going to have the same amount of power as he moves up within the weight classes, and that goes for any fighter that moves up the weight classes. It just is what it is. Those fighters are not going to have the same amount of power because these are fighters, all in all, that are going to be bigger. When it comes down to it, they're going to be able to handle more power, and on top of that, it's going to take a little bit more to knock them out. So no, you don't expect Teofimo Lopez probably to have the same amount of punching power here as what he did at 135. But that's what's also going to make this move very particularly interesting. Is Teofimo's career going to end at 140? And is he going to be an Adrian Broner of the 140-pound division? Not saying that Broner, in my view, was more skilled than Teofimo Lopez, because I don't think that he ever has been. But is Teofimo Lopez, now that he's fighting fighters, all in all, that are near his own same size, is he overall going to start winning a little bit more 140, or is he going to be a gatekeeper? It's going to be very particularly interesting.
You think at lightweight, I might have got a knockout earlier, but not 40? Definitely. I just felt his timing was a little off. He was following shots up with just one counter. Like my dad said, put 2-3 punches together, 2-3-2 instead of just a 2. He should have followed it back up. He should have thrown punches in combinations. And I think just looking too pretty, like I fall into that. When my dad says, Junior, quit trying to look too pretty. You're trying to do that shoulder roll, and there's only one Floyd, so he was getting caught with right hand. So there's definitely things that.
And you heard overall what he said. There's only one Floyd, and I would tend to agree with that. Teofimo Lopez, what he tries to be, in my opinion, is somewhat of a Floyd Mayweather Jr. mimic, and in my opinion, that just doesn't always work. It just is what it is. So Teofimo Lopez, he is going to have to be a little bit careful. He's going to have to be a little bit more defensively responsible. So it's going to be very interesting to see where his career goes from here.
To work on, but you got the job done tonight.
So there it was. Vargas was asked if he liked Teofimo's performance, and you heard what Vargas Jr. said. There are some things he needs to work on. He looked like he gassed out. His timing was off. Guys, let's just look at the dichotomy between a fighter like Lopez versus Gervonta, or even Devin Haney. But let's just focus on Gervonta for now. Have you noticed there has never been a time, in fact, Gervonta moved up to 140. And when Gervonta moved up to 140, how many boxers did you hear say, oh, he has to go back to the drawing board. There's some things that he needs to work on, or he needs another fight.
Right, but Dante, we can't judge those things on a similar level. We have to judge Teofimo completely differently because Teofimo overall, he ended up losing his last fight. So we have to take a look at Teofimo Lopez and say, okay, where does his career go on from here? Can he rebuild his confidence? Can he be that same, interesting fighter or overall great fighter that he was at 135? We can't take a look at his career similar to what Gervonta Tank Davis was because he was going into that fight undefeated. So it's a little bit different. Just is what it is. Now, of course, if one were to make the point, right, well, you could say that, but there's a certain amount of people stating that Teo is better than those guys, then okay, you can make that point because right now Teofimo can't be ranked above some of those other guys, at least in terms of a dominant perspective. But Teofimo Lopez, once again, if we're just talking about his future, do I think all in all that he's just completely screwed at the 140-pound division? No, I would give him a decent chance to maybe mix things up or shake things up. I would say that maybe he has a decent chance over some of the other top contenders, but I'm going to have to see him against some of the other top guys. I think overall the next fight that I would really love to see him in is that one dude against, I believe, Barbosa. Arnold Barbosa, I believe is his name. That's the fight that I would love to see Teofimo Lopez in next.
Before he steps up in competition and fights against the top guys. That's what Andre Ward said after he watched the fight with Lopez and Campa. And that's also what Fernando Vargas Jr. said. I didn't play that clip yet, but he said the same thing. When he was asked who he thought would win the Ryan Garcia fight, he actually picked Ryan Garcia. Now, granted, he did say, I'm going to go with my countryman, Ryan Garcia, because he's Mexican. But even when he said that, he also said, I think Tio needs at least one more fight before he even fights Ryan Garcia.
I'm not so sure about that. I think that if Teofimo Lopez needs 1 or 2 more fights to face somebody, he's going to need a couple more fights before he faces someone like a Regis Prograis or a Jose Ramirez or a Josh Taylor. Because those are the big boys of the 140-pound division. All right, those are the guys that he's going to need a couple of fights for, that he's going to have to gradually build himself up to. And Ryan Garcia maybe as well, because Ryan Garcia, of course, looked very good in his last fight. But if the Teofimo Lopez shows up that I seen in that fight against Campa, Ryan Garcia may have a much bigger fight in his hands than what I once thought. But it would be very interesting to see that fight.
Him and Ryan. You know what, man? I want to see Tio have, like, another fight and then maybe fight Ryan. You know, I think he needs to get his timing back, get in the rhythm of being in the ring. Because you can spar all you want, but, you know, being here fight night is a little different. So, that's going to be a toss-up, but I don't know. I'm going to have to go with Ryan. He's my countryman, man. I'm going to go in. With the American, with the Mexican, and with the Chicano. Yes, yeah.
So, as we've seen, there wasn't much explanation there. He just pretty much said that he was going with his countrymen. Because he really overall did not explain much. Basically, all he said is that he believes that Teofimo Lopez is out of rhythm. Listen, who do I personally think would win that fight? I think that it would be pretty much a toss-up. I think that overall, whoever would catch who first, or whatever, who would basically get their punches off first and get a little bit of respect early, I think that's basically who would win the fight. Because Tio actually looked a little bit better than what I expected in that fight against Pedro Campa. And if Teofimo Lopez, if he can move around decently, keep his hands up and be defensively responsible, he more than likely, in my view, would defeat Ryan Garcia. At least if he showed up in the best version possible. But we'll see.
That was actually funny because you can hear Fernando Vargas clearly say, I'm going for my countrymen, because of the fact that Ryan Garcia is Mexican and Teofimo Lopez is not, which there's nothing wrong with Fernando saying that at all. But you could hear someone else try to say the American, and then you hear somebody say he's Mexican, he's the Chicano. That's when Vargas said yes. But once again, even though Fernando Vargas said he's got to go with his countrymen, he started that piece off, or the response off, by saying, I think Teofimo Lopez needs at least one more fight before he fights Ryan Garcia. Just think about how that sounds. Fernando Vargas just basically said Teofimo Lopez, he has a serious uphill battle at the new weight class, which is, of course, obviously really bad news for Teofimo Lopez. Whenever you ask other professional boxers who wins a fight between Gervonta Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, even Mexican boxers pick Gervonta Tank Davis to win the fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, he said that he believes Gervonta would knock Ryan Garcia out, and he actually said this after Ryan Garcia called up Chavez while he was in his dressing room preparing for the Fortuna fight. Ryan called up Julio Cesar Chavez to get some words of wisdom from him, and then soon as Chavez got off the phone with Ryan Garcia, knowing that Ryan was about to fight Fortuna, Chavez later on admitted in an interview a couple days later, he never even bothered to watch the fight. And he said, when he was asked why he didn't watch the Ryan Garcia fight, Chavez said, and I quote, because I don't watch bullshit. And then when he was asked how would the Gervonta Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia fight play out, Chavez just laughed and said, oh, that would be bad. That would be bad for Ryan Garcia. Then he said he would pick Gervonta to knock Ryan Garcia out.
Well, let me state this. I'm not really sure whether Chavez said that exactly or not, because we all know how Dante sometimes can stretch the truth. But what I will say is this. If he did say that, I wouldn't doubt it. If both of those fighters were at their best, Mr. Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis, if both of those fighters were at their best, who do I believe would win that fight? more than likely Gervonta Tank Davis. However, what I will say is this: Gervonta Tank Davis in his last couple of fights, he has not looked the most impressive in my view as what he could have been. It looked like certain shots affect him the way that I have not seen them affect him in the past. It looks like sometimes the pressure and the power of some of these larger fighters, they are affecting him a little bit more. He still is extraordinarily talented, but I can't really judge and gauge Mr. Gervonta Tank Davis and how great he really is going to be until he finally gets in the ring with a great caliber competition. Now, of course, when it comes to Ryan Garcia, it's the same thing with him because he's not really getting in the ring with anyone elite either. But it's going to be very interesting to see where those guys go.
And now, by way of contrast, when it comes to Teofimo Lopez, and people ask who wins a fight between Lopez and Ryan Garcia, boxers are saying that Teo may not even be ready for Ryan Garcia because they feel he needs at least one more fight. That speaks volumes, guys. Now, once again, I want to go back to what Vargas said, or some of the other things that he said. He said that Teofimo Lopez, he needs to work on some things. He said his timing seems to be off. It seems like he gassed out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've never heard...
Well, I really don't know how Teofimo Lopez really gassed out when he was able to knock this dude out within 7 rounds. A fighter that you can tell, in my opinion, that gassed out was Anthony Joshua versus Andrew Ruiz. I mean, I really don't get some of these narratives. But what I will say is this. Are there certain things that Teofimo, in my view, will have to work on? Yes. In my opinion, the thing that he really needs to work on, all in all, is fighting against taller fighters. And on top of that, adjusting against the weight. And on top of that, his defense. That's really what he needs to work on. Because Teofimo sometimes, overall, has his hands down a little bit too much for his own good.
People talk like this about Devin Haney. We've never heard people talk like this about Gervonta Tank Davis. And it's important to compare them because remember, it wasn't that long ago when we were calling all of these guys the Fantastic Four, the Super Four, et cetera, right? And if you guys recall, I was telling you right here on my channel that Teofimo Lopez and Ryan Garcia, they are the 2 weakest links. And that was something that...
Well, right, Dante, but let's be real. Had Teofimo Lopez and Ryan Garcia, had they been the ones overall that were black fighters, and overall had it been the other way around, you would have pretty much said it anyway, so you're not really a trusted commentator. Because whenever you have a black American fighter, you're automatically already going to put them at the top just because. That's why you even rank Andre and Jamal Charlo on such a high level, even though they really don't have that great of a resume. But it is what it is. You also were the same one that put Deontay Wilder as the best heavyweight of the generation when he beat no one else besides Luis Ortiz. So you're not a trusted commentator. Now, would I agree with you that Devin Haney and Gervonta Tank Davis are above both Teofimo Lopez and overall Ryan Garcia? Yes, I would. But you have proven overall in the past that you're not a very logical and objective commentator. So it just is what it is.
Corroborated by Ryan Garcia and Teofimo. Ryan Garcia, I played the clip for you guys many times, so I shouldn't have to play it again. But Ryan has said on multiple occasions during interviews that he felt Devin Haney and Tank would both beat Teofimo Lopez. And then when Teofimo Lopez was interviewed a while ago...
Those would be very interesting fights. Gervonta Tank Davis, in my view, at his best, looks to be the most talented. But for whatever reason, within his past couple of fights, he has not really looked like himself. Now, maybe it's because of the fighter's size, or maybe all in all, he's not doing as well against the power. I'm not sure. Or maybe he's not mentally himself. But we'll see all in all what happens. Devin Haney, I think, is a very, very decent boxer, even though I think defensively he could get a little bit better. But any one of those fights would be very particularly interesting. Who do I think is the best one out of all of them right now? I would say the most talented one has to be Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, the one all in all that, in my view, overall has to be ranked on the highest pound-for-pound list-wise has to be Devin Haney because he's the one that has the best resume out of all of them. At least overall, he's the one that has the belts right now.
Before he lost, he said that he felt Ryan Garcia was the...
And let me also state this, just the same thing for Mr. Teofimo Lopez. Devin Haney is going to have a hell of a time at 140 pounds as well. Because in my view, defensively, he's not really a Floyd Mayweather Jr. He's a person all in all that he tries to be like Floyd Mayweather Jr. in my opinion, but he's a little bit defensively irresponsible here and there. He gets hit a little bit too much. Now, he is very quick, and he's getting better with each and every fight. But 140 pounds is going to be completely different for both Mr. Teofimo Lopez and also Devin Haney and also Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis. Because you have fighters there that are going to be able to compete with their power and their size and their skill set. You have certain fighters there like a Josh Taylor. You have Montana Love. You have overall Mr. Antoine Gary Russell Jr., I believe. You have overall, I believe, Regis Prograis, Jose Ramirez. That is going to be a very competitive division.
Link out of the 4. It turns out they were both right. Just look at the contrast again. Just think about this. You guys notice when Devin Haney, when he got staggered by Linares, notice there was no one saying that Devin Haney, he needs to work on some things. He needs a couple more fights before he fights Ryan Garcia. He fights this guy or Teofimo. No boxers were saying this about Devin Haney. I mean, outside of somebody like Ryan Garcia, but that's a whole different story. Now, guys, you heard everything that Fernando Vargas Jr. said right there. And just to show you old media's desperate attempt to push their agenda, I want you to pay attention to what the reporter said in response to what the boxer Fernando Vargas Jr. just said. This is the reporter with Fight Hype. Now, because this reporter in particular didn't like what Fernando Vargas and all of the other boxers are saying about Teofimo's performance, he desperately tries to force Fernando Vargas to say something positive about Teofimo Lopez, or at least about Teo's performance.
You got the job done tonight. A lot of talent. Oh, a shitload of talent. I like Teo, bro. Because he seems like he does shit that other guys. It's not the most fundamentally sound, but it's unique stuff. Bro, it's entertainment. I came out here enjoying a good night of boxing with my brother and my dad, and he's an entertainer.
Well, people say that Teofimo Lopez is not the most fundamentally sound. What I'll say about Teofimo was this. In my opinion, his defense does need to slightly improve. Because the only main fundamental thing that I see wrong about Teofimo Lopez is that sometimes either A, he tries to go for the knockout too much, or he don't keep his hands up. But I thought that this performance was a much better version of himself than what it was against George Kambosos. Now, of course, some may say, well, George Kambosos was a much greater fighter than Campa. I believe that George Kambosos, in my view, I believe that he's a very decent fighter. But I think that he ended up getting a lucky night. I think he ended up getting a Teofimo Lopez that did not take him very seriously. That's what I believe. But anyway.
On the show.
Now, did you guys hear that? Do you guys see how the reporter, he tried to rebuff what Fernando Vargas Jr. said by saying, but Teofimo, he's got a lot of talent, right? I mean, even though he's not fundamentally sound, he's a unique fighter. And Vargas' only response was, well, yeah, I like the guy. I mean, he's definitely...
Well, I wouldn't know how Teofimo Lopez is not fundamentally sound. A fighter that is not fundamentally sound is someone like a Deontay Wilder. There's not a lot that pops off the page, in my opinion, about Teofimo Lopez that he's not fundamentally sound. But what I will say is this. Sometimes in certain spots, he needs to look a little bit less for the knockout and also be a little bit more defensive. And on top of that, he's also sometimes going to have to learn overall when to throw certain combinations. Because Teofimo sometimes overall relies a little bit too much on his counterpunching ability. Now, overall, his counterpunching ability, in my view, is very, very good. But sometimes when, just certain one-shot or 1-2s are not working, you're going to have to get in certain combinations or pressure them. He did it against Lomachenko, but Lomachenko is about 2 weight classes smaller than him. Can he do it against fighters that are going to be his own same size and have about the same amount of power as him, maybe even a little bit more? We'll see.
Entertaining. We came to be entertained, and that's what we got. But entertainment is not enough to beat the top guys. You have to be more than entertaining, and you have to be more than just talented. You have to be special. There's a major difference. Any boxer that can get in the ring and win any kind of fight has talent, and his talent is boxing. He knows how to box. The word talent means you have a particular skill. But to what degree? And according to a lot of these professional boxers that handed out the report card to Teofimo Lopez, he doesn't have the talent to compete with the top guys at the welterweight or the junior welterweight division.
Well, I would slow down about the welterweight division right now, Dante. I mean, once again, I don't know why you're putting all this pressure on Teofimo Lopez's shoulders. Once again, that's how you can tell that Dante does not like Teofimo Lopez. Because whenever a fighter were to lose, especially, a traumatic loss that Teofimo Lopez had against George Kambosos because it was the first loss, you don't just put him in there immediately overall with the A-grade fighters of the next weight class. You have to slowly incrementally build him up, especially when he's going to a new weight class. Now, of course, there are certain fighters out there like a Canelo Alvarez or a Terrence Crawford that can go to a weight class, almost immediately and face some of the top contenders there. But they had not been defeated for years. And on top of that, those are the creme de la creme fighters.
But the most beautiful
Now, Teofimo Lopez, in my opinion, is a very talented fighter. Now, is he the creme de la creme? We'll see.
thing about me saying this is if Teofimo Lopez keeps his word, we will soon find out how much talent he really has, because obviously you can't tell off.
I would agree. It's going to be very particularly interesting. We're also going to find out within the next coming years how great Gervonta Tank Davis, how great Vasily Lomachenko. Well, maybe Lomachenko, because he may be aged out within these next few years, but we'll see what happens. But we're going to see how truly great some of these fighters, like a Teofimo Lopez, like a Ryan Garcia, like a Devin Haney, and like a Gervonta Tank Davis truly are. We're going to see how good they truly are. It's going to be very interesting.
Fighting someone like Campa, or at least we certainly can't say he looks special after that performance against Campa. I'm going to talk a lot more about this when it comes to Teofimo moving up to 140 and other fighters that have moved up, from the fighters that were very successful and the fighters that were unsuccessful. But I'm going to wrap this one up, guys. That's all I got for now, and I'm on to the next one.
That's pretty much about it for today. But I just thought that I would review that because I found it very particularly interesting. But that's really about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later. And we will see what happens with Mr. Teofimo Lopez's career.